Chapter 4 Doctors. Where do I start? Doctors really don't get me. Mom's a nurse, so I guess she speaks their language. But they sure don't know how to talk to me. I've seen dozens of doctors in my life who all try to analyze me and figure me out. None of them can fix me. So I usually ignore them and act like I'm not going to say that word, person that they think I am. I paste on a blank look and I focus on one wall and pretend their questions aren't too hard for me to understand. It's sort of what they expect anyway. When I turned 5, it was time to think about enrolling me in school. So my mother took me to a doctor whose job it was to figure out how smart I was. So she wheeled me in, locked the brakes so my wheelchair would not roll, and made sure the lap strap was fastened. When my seatbelt comes undone, and it does every once in a while, I slide out of that chair like a piece of wet spaghetti. The specialist was a very large man. The bottom button of his shirt had come undone, and his stomach poked out through above his belt. Gross. "My name is Dr. Hughley," he said in a booming voice. For real, I couldn't make this stuff up. "We're going to play a game today, okay? I'll ask you some questions and you get to play with the toys here. Won't that be fun?" I knew it would be a long, long hour. He brought out a sack of well-used, hopefully not lead-tainted, wood blocks, then leaned in so close to me I could see the pores in his face. Gross. "Can you stack these in order according to size?" he said loudly and slowly, as if I were hard of hearing or really stupid. But who was being stupid? Didn't he know I couldn't even grab the blocks? Of course I knew which block was bigger than the other, but I couldn't stack them even if he paid me money. So I just took my arm and I swept them all to the floor. They fell with a wooden clatter, and I tried not to laugh as he picked them up. He breathed really hard as he reached for them. Next, he held up a glossy 8x10 cards with different colors painted on each one. "Tell me when you see the color blue, Melody," he said in that voice that told me he thought this was all a waste of time. So when the blue card showed up, I pointed to it and I made a noise. "Buh," I said. "Marvelous, tremendous, stupendous," he shouted. He praised me like I just passed the test to get into college. If I could have rolled my eyes, I would have. And then he showed me green. So I kicked and made a noise, but my mouth can't make the G sound. And so then the doctor looked disappointed. He scribbled something on his clipboard, pulled out another stack of cards, and then loudly, "I'm going to ask you some questions now, Melody. These might be hard. Do your best, okay?" I just looked at him and waited while he pulled the first set of cards in front of me. Number 1. Which one of these is not like the others? I mean, where did he get this stuff? Sesame Street? He showed me pictures of a tomato, a cherry, and a round red balloon, and a banana. So I know he was probably looking for the balloon as the answer, but that just was way too easy. So I pointed to the banana because the first 3 were round and they were red, and the banana was not. Dr. Hughley sighed and scribbled more notes. "Number 2, he said, and he showed me 4 more cards. This time there were pictures of a cow, a whale, a camel, and an elephant. Which animal gives birth to a calf?" Now, people, I watch Animal Planet all the time, and I know that for a fact that all the animals he had pictured there had babies called a calf. I thought doctors were supposed to be smart. What to do? So I hit each picture slowly and carefully, then did it once more to make sure he understood, but I don't think he did. I heard him mumble "cow" as he wrote more notes. It was clear he was giving up on me, and I noticed a copy of Goodnight Moon on his bookshelf. I think it was written in Spanish. It was called Buenos Noches, Luna. That would have been fun to look at, but I had no way of telling him I'd like to see the book. And after watching Sesame Street and Dora the Explorer a million times, and sitting for hours watching the Spanish channels, I could understand quite a bit of Spanish if it was spoken slowly enough, and at least enough words to read the title of that book. but he never thought to ask me about that, of course. I know the words and melodies of 100 songs. Sorry, guys, they have an announcement. All right, back to the story. I knew the words and melodies of hundreds of songs, a symphony exploding inside my head with no one but me to hear it. But he never asked me about music. And I know all the colors and shapes and animals that children my age were supposed to know, plus a lot more. In my head, I could count to 1,000 forward and backwards, and I could identify hundreds of words on sight. But all of it stuck inside. Dr. Hewley, even though he had been to college for like a million years, would never be smart enough to see inside of me. So I put on my handicap face, and I took my mind back to last summer when Mom and I went to the zoo. I really like the elephants, but talk about stink. Actually, Dr. Hughley sort of reminded me of one of them. My mom and the doctor had no idea why I was smiling. Excuse me. As we rolled into the waiting room, while he wrote up his evaluation of me, it didn't take long. I'm always amazed at how adults assume I can't hear. They talk about me like I'm invisible, figuring I am too, and she calls herself this a lot, but I'm not going to use the word, to understand their conversation. I learned quite a bit this way, but this conversation was really awful. He didn't even try to soften the news for my mom, who I'm sure felt like she got hit by a truck. I'm going to stop here for just a second and tell you a little bit about her mom, which you're about to discover. Her mom believes that Melody is quite capable of so much. And so when other people do not believe the same, she gets a little angry. And sometimes the words she uses aren't very nice. But let's see what happens when this doctor tells Melody's mom what he thinks. He began by clearing his throat. "Mrs. Brooks," he then said, "it is my opinion that Melody is severely brain damaged and profoundly—" that word again. Whoa. Even though I was only 5 at the time, I had watched enough Easter Seals telethons to know that this was bad, really bad, and I felt a big thud in my gut. My mom gasped, then said nothing for a full minute. Finally, she took a deep breath and protested quietly. "But I know she's bright. I can see it in her eyes." "Well, you love her. That's only normal to have wishful thinking," the doctor told her gently. "No, she has a spark. It is more than that. It is a flame of real intelligence. I just know it." My mother insisted, and she sounded a little stronger. "It takes time to accept the limitations of a beloved child. She has cerebral palsy, Miss Brooks." "I know the name of her condition, doctor," my mother said, and now had ice in her voice. "But a person is so much more than the name of a diagnosis on a chart." Good try, Mom, I was thinking, but already her voice was losing its edge, and it was melting into the mushiness of helplessness. "She laughs at jokes," my mother told him. The ice in her voice replaced desperation. "Right at the punchline." Mom's voice faded. What she was saying sounded ridiculous, even to me, but I could see just that she couldn't find the words to explain her feelings, and that I had some smart stuck in here somewhere. Dr. Hughley looked from her to me, and he shook his head and he said, "You're lucky she has the ability to smile and laugh, but Melody will never be able to walk on her own or speak a single sentence. She will never be able to feed herself. She'll never be able to take care of her own personal needs or understand anything more than a simple instruction. Once you accept that reality, you can deal with the future." Well, that was just plain mean. Now, my mama hardly ever cries, but she did that day. She cried and cried and cried. Dr. Hughley had to give her a whole box of tissues. Both of them ignored me while she just sobbed, and he tried to find nice words to make her feel better, which he didn't do a very good job. Finally, he gave her options. "You and your husband have several decisions to make," he told my mom. You can choose to keep her at home, or you can send her to a special school for developmentally disabled. And there aren't many choices locally here. Where do they get those almost pleasant sounding phrases to describe a kid like me? Mom made a sound that could have been like a mewing of a kitten. She was losing it. Dr. Hughley continued, and you can also decide to put Melody in a residential facility where she can be cared for and kept comfortable. He pulled out this colorful brochure with a smiling child in a wheelchair on the cover and handed it to my mom, and I trembled as she took it. Let's see, the doctor said. Melody is 5 now. That's a perfect age for her to learn to adjust to a new environment. You and your husband can get on with your lives without her as a burden. In time, her memories of you will fade. I stared at my mom frantically. I didn't want to be sent away. Was I a burden? I never even thought about it like that. Maybe it would be easier for them if I weren't around. I gulped. My hands got cold. Mom wasn't looking at me. She was staring daggers at that doctor. She crumbled up the tissue she held, and then she stood up. Let me tell you something, doctor. There is no way in heaven or H-E double hockey sticks that we will be sending Melody away to a nursing home. I blinked. Was this my mother? I blinked again, and she was still there, right up in that doctor's face. She wasn't finished. And you know what? My mother said, and she angrily hurled the brochure into the trash can. I think you're cold and insensitive. I hope you never have a child with difficulties. You'd probably put it out with your trash. Dr. Hughley looked shocked. And what's more, my mom continued, I think you're wrong. No, I know you're wrong. Melody has more brains hidden in her head than you'll ever have, despite those fancy degrees from fancy schools you've got posted all over your walls. It was the doctor's turn to blink. You've got it easy. You have all your physical functions working properly. You never have to struggle just to be understood. You think you're smart because you have a medical degree? He was wise enough to keep his mouth shut and ashamed enough to lower his head. My mama was on a roll. You're not so intelligent, sir. You're lucky. All of us who have all of our faculties intact are just plain blessed. Melody is able to figure out things, communicate, and manage in a world where nothing works right for her. She is the one in this room with true intelligence. And she marched out of his office, then rolling me swiftly through the thick doors. In the hall, we did a quick fist bump. Well, the best I could manage, and my hands were no longer cold. I'm taking you right now, and I'm enrolling you at Spalding Street Elementary School, she announced with determination as we headed back to the car. Let's get busy.